Good afternoon. I'd like to call into order of this special session of the Board of Public Utilities. For the agenda that's in front of us. I'd like to call us to order for that. I guess at this point we ask for a roll call, if that's in order. Ms. Lawson?
Roll call, maybe Mulvaney Henry,
Here.
Parker,
Here.
Gonzalez, here, Groneman,
Here.
Haley,
Present.
Wakes.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. So, I don't know if everyone has had an opportunity on the board to, look at the agenda that we have. It was sent out. You know, if there's any questions regarding the, agenda that has brought us for this work session, and if anyone has,
Move to approve the agenda.
Mr. Rose, I second.
Right. Roll call, please, Ms. Lawson.
Roll call, Mulvaney Henry,
Aye.
Parker,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Groneman,
Aye.
Haley,
Aye.
Wakes.
Aye.
That motion carries.
Great. Well, that being where we are, we can move with great dispatch, and we're now at item 4 already, where we're looking for a board update. Is there anyone that has attended anything that they'd like to share, either with the UG or otherwise, that they'd like to share during the course of this work session?
Just myself attended the APPA conference in New Orleans, Louisiana. Had a great time there and really learned a lot. They were providing a lot of information about data centers as well, and a lot of information about other areas regarding utilities and was there to receive the award for Board of Public Utilities, along with myself and Senator Haley Lee, where they really talked about Light of Navajo, and was very pleased to be a part of that and to receive the award for the utility. But there were how many people were present? I can't remember.
Is that 1,000?
Yeah, I thought they said 1,900, maybe. But it was quite a few people there, and we really had a great time. And you were missed, Mr. Ash. Many of the utilities from across the nation did ask about you, and of course, the Navajo tribe leaders were very pleased that we were part of Light of Navajo as well.
Thank you. And for those who are following without video, that was Stevie Wakes, Board Member Wakes. This is Haley, and my update is I too, has been mentioned, did attend APPA, the American Public Power Association meeting that was held. And as Mr. Wake said, it was most informative and inspirational. Not only in Navajo, for which we received one of the awards that was there. I think we have pictures somewhere, we may have them. But also those that were gathered to talk about our public power concerns. It was my first time going, and to meet others who are engaged in this on an ongoing basis of the ability to provide reliable, safe power across the board. It was most interesting and most informative. One of the topics was data centers, some of the breakout sessions, and I'm glad to see this on our agenda. We're not the only ones coming to grips with what it can mean and has meant to other communities. And there's some information that was provided at APPA that was, again, most informative. As Mr. Wakes said, several people cited and lifted up our general manager, Mr. Ash, who is carries quite a bit of respect among the entity, the organization, and so he's already conveyed some of their best. I'd like to affirm that as well. So that having been said, it was a good conference, and I'm optimistic and hope very much to be able to attend next year when it's in Boston, but the jury's still out on that. That's all I have. Any other?
I'll just do a quick update for the American Water Works Association. That my favorite part always is when Steve or anybody else takes me in through the exhibit hall and I get to see some of the things we wouldn't be able to see from the top of the ground. I saw two of our leak protection, detection, not protection, leak detection systems. And so that's really been my favorite part the last few times. And at the Kansas section lunch, our Steve Nerschel will be taking over his chair for the next year. So his recognition was good for Nerschel, Steve Nerschel. Not Steve Green. Steve Green's already done that before. So that was good. It was a huge conference, as always. It's very large, but very good.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that update. Any other, any local meetings, any UG meetings or anything else for the good of the order? Anyone? All right. Thank you, Ms. Gonzalez. Appreciate that. Well, at this point then, we ask, General Manager might give some update, insight, if you will.
Sure. No, I was kind of bittersweet to miss the APPA conference. I have been involved with that organization for a long time in a couple of different fashions, but it's always a great event. I'm glad that I've been able to make some inroads there. I think it's beneficial to our team and obviously getting our people involved in the Navajo project and doing some things to, try to keep us moving where we're wanting to move from a culture and a standpoint and that kind of thing. It's all really great. I did get some comments from Angie about how great the AWWA conference was and how she thought she might go in the future or wish she had gone in the past. So, one of the things I know, I've follow a lot of the emails and the different things about the AWWA, and our water group is very, very active in that organization. Carry a lot of respect. We've had numerous people from our organization represent as the chair of the Kansas section. And so I think when it comes to the national trade associations, we're doing our best to make sure we're making inroads, stay active, participate in development opportunities, and just learn industry best practice and stay abreast of new technology. So glad to hear those two events went real well. And that's about all I have for today outside of the presentation.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ash. So I guess it's what we've gathered today to discuss regarding the data center discussion that we had, the work session. I, for one, am pretty excited about us undertaking this. It's a hot topic, not just for Kansas, but around the country. So I'm pleased that we will have this opportunity to review some of those points and to exchange some information. Let me ask the board too, at some point, I've had some inquiry as to whether or not there would be any public. There have been two members from the public who reached out to ask if there would be an opportunity. I don't know if they're following online, but and I said, I don't know how appropriate is what I said it would be at this point. But one or two do have, one of them certainly has learned it. We can all probably opine as to who that might be and has studied it and has requested that there might be an opportunity for their input. And I said I would take that up. I have done that right now.
Their input with respect to just data centers in general, data centers of.
I believe that's what it was, landscape. This one in particular, without naming your name, is involved with the national organization that has studied this very closely. And I felt that his.
Is it a national organization of data centers?
No, it's a national organization that follows energy and environmental concerns.
Yeah.
Is it Sierra Club?
Yeah, and so, and because, and to be honest with you,
Is Ty?
I did speak with Mr. Ash regarding that, and he informed me that they're in communication and,
Yeah, I thought they were.
and then that organization did mention that they really appreciate the involvement, that they have already with Mr. Ash and the board, and the staff, so, I was very pleased to hear that, so.
Well, at the appropriate time, I mean, this may not be that, but I've done my due diligence when it was.
Generally during the work sessions, it's just information that's provided to us and the public doesn't, there's not a public.
And what I did share with the parties that is that it was not on the agenda for public. Normally there are public comments that are brought during our regular meeting, and this was a special work session. I did not see it, though. The opinions certainly, especially where they're learned, would be, I think, helpful during our deliberation, but I've done what I said I would do, and that is to bring it up at every juncture that there are interested
Yeah, you
parties.
could actually go and listen in the boardroom.
Or beyond
I
Zoom.
think they're listening in. They're probably, yeah, they probably are listening in. So I've done what I said I would in terms of the inquiry and sharing that. So if we can move forward on and look forward to that time that we have the input from other concerned entities about this very timely topic.
I guess just to complete that full circle, question I have is, two of these projects that are under review, as you know, I mean, as you well know, are not projects that were brought forward by BPU. Two of the projects are being brought forward by the unified government. And so my question is the Sierra Club also having conversations with the appropriate folks at the unified government and economic development? And I just want to make sure that there's two sides of the street,
I
right?
don't know to what extent those conversations are being had. I do know there is that awareness by this and other entities, this one particular entity and others that is being fomented from from the UG, and that we are basically just doing the review. So I would assume that that is something that's going on.
And I only say that because, please keep me honest, council, as you know, we will not be doing the development agreement that occurs with the projects, right? I mean, the BPU doesn't do the development agreements. And so some of the things I heard Ty, when he was at our meeting last time, ask for, from my perspective, would certainly be appropriate to visit as a part of the development agreement, sort of those, extra side, environmental, impact agreements, if you will, that Ty had referred to. I think those would be appropriate discussions for those. And so from that perspective, I mean, this body has we don't have any say over those agreements, right? And I mean, if these agreements come to fruition, this utility is called to serve these projects, as you know. So I would encourage him and them
I do, but
to have that discussion with folks who actually are doing a development agreement. I mean, we've seen development agreements that maybe in the end, agreements that none of us were involved in, maybe disfavor the utility in the end, right? E-bones, but, right, we've seen those agreements. And so I guess I would encourage that group to also, our staff has been more than willing, to meet with and have discussions with, this group and others about these particular projects and all kinds of projects. So I guess I just wanted to impress upon Ty and his group to also, visit 7th Street as well.
Hopefully the unified government, when they do their development agreements.
Yeah.
That they will consult with us, because it is important to us as a utility to be involved in it. And also to consult with other organizations such as
Other stakeholders.
Sierra Club and that.
Sure.
So
I certainly concur with what you're saying, and but not to hold us as de minimis. I believe we have a role on this board. We're not just here, hopefully, for some Pyrrhic understanding of what we have here, but not to give insight or advice, and even some direct counsel as to which direction some subsequent MOU or development agreement might have. I'm not here just to be personally at the beck and call of what final decision, especially if we're able to reach that through this process and others from internal with our team of staff here, understanding, or with even that external, whether they're working on both sides. We are here, I am here, and I hope that all of us are, is to have a meaningful part of the discussion and not just be window dressing to what's evolving and ultimately what the UG may decide. I would hope our voice would be heard. And for me, it's a matter of looking at what we get back from these data centers and to have a clear understanding of how we don't too heavily impact disproportionately our responsibility to see this utility governed well, to not be excessive in meeting the needs of future data centers, and to see what kind of benefits might be conferred, frankly, from the rates back to the rate. But we're getting ahead of it. That's probably going to be found here. And I intend, though, to raise that not just here, but with the UG or any other entity that ultimately will be asking us to partner with whatever's decided.
I hear you.
You'll see.
Oh, I have no doubt. I just,
All right. Yeah, but anyway, I.
sorry, I didn't sidetrack us. I did sidetrack us further, so I apologize.
I sidetracked it. I just said I would bring it up, and I'm glad we've had this discussion. Really, yeah. And I'd appreciate it, if there's no other comments. If we move on into the presentation.
Sure. And so just to, I guess, address part of that conversation quickly, we do and will continue and have, in fact, we had a meeting today, unified government personnel. So we're working hard to make sure anybody and everybody that is a stakeholder of some kind has the right information, the good information, the information that we've gleaned from all the investigating we've done this far. So we've met with representatives from the Sierra Club a couple different times. Been good meetings, I think. Andrew, sounds like Mr. Wakes confirmed that. We met with several commissioners. We met with the commissioner today to clear up a few questions and things. I meet monthly with Mayor Garner, County Administrator Johnston, and whoever they deem fit. And we clear up any questions during those meetings too that might have come since, we don't meet daily, but in those gaps that where we're not meeting, there's other presentations, other information brought forward. And so other questions come up, right? And so, our job, I think you charge us with, is to make sure we're doing all that the right way. And we are. We're communicating regularly and offering to communicate as regular as anybody wants information. And we're committed to doing that going forward too. So because of all of that, and because of some of the different developments and things that have hit our city, or opportunities that are hitting our city, we felt like we have run down enough information at this point that we could put together a presentation that was meaningful to our board and to anybody listening about what we've discovered so far with the data centers. And all of this information is only as good as if a couple of things happen, right? Is so some of the projects that are put before us today have challenges. Some of them have zoning challenges. If that doesn't get resolved, it's mute. We're on the discussion. If it does get resolved, there's still the development agreement with the unified government. If it doesn't come through those hoops, we're out of the equation, we're done. And then the last piece of that particular project is, then would come to us. And at this point, and Andrew and the rest of the team that's going to present information today, at this point, we can tell you with all confidence that we have not offered any incentive. Here's our rate, take it or leave it. And they've said, okay, we'll take it. So we're probably going to co-opt this presentation a little bit. Andrew is probably going to do a lot of the heavy lifting. Aaron McNew has some parts and pieces in here. And then we'll be available for any questions you might have that come up, or any other topics around data centers development, how our systems react. Steve's here, Lee's here. Whether there's been some environmental impact and stewardship type of issues raised, questions raised. And so Lee has ran down a lot of that information. And Steve can certainly talk about smaller water effects or questions that have come up. So I think with that, we'll jump right in. Andrew will kick us off, and we're on to slide one if we could, Rob.
Yeah, thanks. And again, as Jeremy said, and you guys alluded to, it's these are really big projects that impact a whole bunch of people. And both it impacts the unified government as well as ourselves. And so we're all aware of that. David Johnston over at the UG is aware of that. So we're in communication and we make sure that we're hand in hand as we move down this path because it is really important, really sizable, and it will have drastic impacts on both the BPU side as well as the unified government side. So those are real things, and I understand how important they are to everybody.
Andrew, for purposes of those might be following audio, could you just identify?
Sure.
Because we have some people.
My name is Andrew Ferris. I'm the Chief Financial Officer here at BPU.
Thank you.
And so as we start looking at this is, in the first place, why are they looking at KCK, right? Why are we an attractive site? Obviously, a few months ago, Kansas had no regulations in place that allowed for, I'll say, taxability for these entities to take advantage of taxable locations. And now the state of Kansas has stepped forward and joined some of those other states to allow some of those things to take place. That has progressed those conversations in one regard. In the other piece is, we're also a strategic centralized location, right? Is a lot of these data centers have been located there in Virginia, and they have to find new homes. One, they're growing in size. And then two, they need to find other locations, right? They look at the Floridas of the world, and yes, population is moving that direction, but those aren't ideal for data centers as a general rule. But you do see the Microsofts and so forth will state that will have data centers in every single state in the union. And so those things are actively happening. And so Kansas and Kansas City is one of those locations that are actively being researched by these groups. Again, the access to reliable power capacity. So here in the central part of the US, we have a really good mix of both thermal and renewable generation, right? We have 40% of the state of Kansas generation is coming from wind today. So we have a lot of active resources. We have a lot of land that can be utilized for, I'll say, renewable resources. All of those things are important to these providers. Again, we have proximity to the fiber backbone. We have great fiber access here locally in Kansas City. And then again, one of the things that we think is a selling point and that we've heard from a number of these customers are, we are publicly owned and we are agile, stable, and responsive. Again, I don't know how many people are blowing smoke, I'll say, but they really say that we are actively engaged, and I believe we are actively engaged. I have conversations multiple times a week with multiple parties, and I think we are being responsive to those needs, and we're open to exploring all the different avenues of what that relationship might mean. And so we're moving forward in a lot of different ways and making sure that we can serve those customers in a way that is helpful to all of us, right? So next slide, please. So some of the projects that we're exploring today, so these are 3 projects that are currently on the radar. I don't want to give any indication that all 3 of these projects are going to happen. And that we have currently no signed agreements with any of these data center customers. So
Nor does the unified government.
Nor does the unified government. So we are all walking through this path together. And so part of this is, hey, they want to make sure that we can meet their needs, and we want to make sure that they can fulfill our obligations. And so we are stepping through this step by step. And so again, we have no agreements in place today, but they're all fully aware of our stances on rates and those type of things, and some of the requirements that we have that need fulfilled to ensure that, our customers are going to be held harmless on this transaction. So as you're aware, the Project Wolf project, which is approximately a 600 megawatt project located at 123rd and Parallel Parkway. So that project is split into 2 parts, 300 megawatts on the north side of Parallel and 300 megawatts on the south side of Parallel. Again, as Jeremy mentioned, it has its own hurdles in terms of zoning and planning and those type of things. And so we'll see exactly what comes through the unified government as part of that. Project Linda That location is still technically confidential, but it is anticipated if that project moves forward, that that would be a 200 MW project. It will not have some of the same issues in terms of zoning and so forth. But again, it likely has its own challenges that it has to step through. And then there's the power transitions project, which is roughly 200 MW or slightly below 200 MW. And that's at that former Quindaro power plant site. So that's a project we've been talking about in the past. Rose, you got a question?
It's actually not a question, Andrew. It's an emphasis on the fact that the substations for all three of these projects would be paid for by the developer.
That's a very good point. I do want to reiterate that everything on site, the developer will pay for. That is 100% true. There will not be any on-site work that is paid for by BPU or the unified government in that case. And we'll get into this later, but there'll be other work that may be required depending on the size of these projects. And we're still working through those avenues in terms of exactly how those assets will be paid for, by who, when, all of those things. So we're still working through plenty of challenges on that stuff, but those are things that we are actively under the, I'll say, conversation of, and looking at what other projects around the country are doing and the best ways to fund and finance those and who picks up what tab and how. So those are all very good points, and we are committed to ensuring that us as current ratepayers will be positively impacted by these customers coming. It will not be negatively impacted. We do not receive any benefit by bringing in a negative customer to the system, right? Growing doesn't warrant any additional funds, those type of things. So it's all about that positive contribution, and we expect that to be the case. And so again, that power transitions data center is at the Quindaro power plant site. Plenty of hurdles still left to go in there, right? We have the remediation, abatement, all of those tasks that still have to go through. But we're hopeful for that side as well, because again, we have some liabilities there that we're hoping to get out of, bring that back to the tax roll, all of those things. So we're really hopeful for that, and we're continuing dialogue with that data center as well, so.
What's the, on the second one, the Linda, where they're gonna build their and maintain their own substation? Why are they going that route as opposed to we build, they pay for it, and I guess on the other ones, we maintain them?
So on our other substation, yes, we maintain them. A lot of this is speed to market, and these are big money people with
A lot of resources.
fees behind all of their resources. Plus, they don't have to jump through all of the municipal purchasing hoops that we have to jump through to remain compliant with all of our policy. So there's a couple of things there. One, they have so much money that they know they're going to do these projects somewhere. So they already have long lead items like substation transformers. There's 3 or 4 year, 5 year items. They've already got build spots that they've funded and put in process. They can bring that. Now, they can't do that without meeting all of the standards and specifications that Darren team, needs to operate by. So they will have to, should that come to fruition in that manner, they would have to do it all with the approval and meeting all of our specifications and standards. But it's really.
That answers my question. The speed of getting it done, and they've got they don't.
That's correct.
Supply and don't have to worry about the supply chain issues.
Almost everyone we talk to, they say, do you have those things now? How long till you get them? What if we can get our own faster? And because they all are, they're buying build spots, they're deploying them wherever they need to deploy.
Yeah, and so that's part of this change in this world, right? Is that historically, we feel like we need to own and build and all of those things when the process is what it is. But one of the things is, as we reach out to different utilities that are doing data centers, what are they doing? What works? What doesn't work? And so we're having those conversations with different entities to see, hey, how does this change impact us positively, negatively, those type of things. And so a lot of it is the nice thing is we don't have to put forth capital, which would then mean debt and some of these type of things. And so I think this will probably be a net positive overall, and we'll ensure it is before we move in that direction. But
And just to restate, the obvious, so the Wolf is 600 megawatt, Linda 200 megawatt, 200 again for power transitions. What is our current load, full load right now? Is it 400? I've heard
So-
400. What is?
So generally speaking, if I was to quote something, I would generally tell you 500 is our summer peak and 400 is our winter peak. Those are easy round numbers. You'll see in one of these slides that I put 485 for the 2025 peak. That's really where I expect it to be, but right around 500 megawatts in summer is where we generally sit. So we haven't crossed 500 for several years, but generally ballpark of 500 megawatts.
So were all these implemented, we'd be treble, we'd be doing, we'd have to have a 3 times generation we currently have for our full system.
Yes,
Right.
and so some of it, as we, again, these are all proposals that are here, right? And
Yeah.
so as we move forward, when we sign up the first customer to move forward, whatever project that may be, it will definitely impact the next customer in line. And therefore, I don't necessarily anticipate all 3 of these projects coming to fruition. The time frame likely won't work for them. So these are all proposals that we're working through that channel with. And so I don't anticipate all 3 of these projects to come to fruition. And so it'll be, who do we like and where are they at in this process that we're going through? And so those will be things that we're going to consider as we continue to move down this road. And so we have active conversations with all 3 of these. All 3 seem to be great potential partners, but it will definitely impact it whenever we sign that first one, because it'll impact the other 2 for sure.
To that end, we are having those conversations today with Darren and his team, the planning engineers. Is, what happens if Project Wolf, let's just say, since it is split, what happens if one side gets inked and the other side doesn't? The first one to sign is going to affect what the others are able to do. So, it's not out of the possibility that we couldn't have one sign and then we go back to the others and say, hey, you no longer have 200 available. We can only give you 100 and manage it to what we can manage, so to speak. They are all going to affect each other if they do come to fruition.
And then obviously the time, right? So again, the more quantity we're getting ahead, the more quantity we bring on, the more transmission assets that are required to serve that load and the grid in general. And so therefore, if we bring on a few hundred megawatts, that's now going to require Darren's team to build transmission assets, which then take time and all that other stuff. And so now it pushes out their timeline in terms of when they expected or hoped to be on to years later. And therefore, do they move to a different site that they're talking with other utilities about? So
I think we'll get into some of that in
we will.
a later slide.
Next slide. So again, some of the stuff that we're talking through, and this is just in a general sense, is these customers are really large. Again, we're talking about a 600 megawatt customer, 200 megawatt customers. They obviously have very large impacts on the system as a whole. And again, 600 versus 500, larger than the entire city into itself, right? That's what we know. And so with that is, how do we best serve? Again, we're really talking about the entire grid that we're serving. We're not serving data center A or data center B. We're serving the entire grid. And we do the same thing when Marvin Windows moves in and when General Motors expands their line and these type of things. So we have these conversations all the time on all these customers, right? This is just amplified numbers. And so how do we serve those customers? And we're having conversations today on additional on-site power delivery infrastructure, whether that be, transmission assets, whether that be generation assets. And so we're looking both locally on those items as well as items far away, right? So as we talk about our purchase power agreements, right? Those are all distributed generation, not located here in Wyandotte County. Again, Wyandotte County is not particularly good for large scale solar, obviously not good for wind projects. But we are seeing more battery projects looking to locate in Wyandotte County and the metro in general. general. And so those are things that we're considering, right? And then obviously we have some location here internally that might work for thermal generation as well. So that would be generally natural gas. Then upgrades to the broader transmission system. Should I pause for a minute?
Yeah, thank you.
If anybody needs to hurry through.
No, good to go. I don't want to disturb anybody, but
You're good. Dick, grab some food. You won't disturb me, for sure. Don't worry about that. But again, as we talk through BPU's broader transmission system, is our system is well-built and reliable today. But as we add new load, we're gonna need to change things, right? Whether that be, Darren will talk about this in a bit, capacitor banks or additional transmission lines. Again, potentially bringing in 345, whatever these things might be, those are going to be big conversations. And so these smaller projects have different impacts than the larger projects. And we're gonna have to work through that both from a funding standpoint as well as a timing standpoint. So those are both really important things. And then again, the additional energy supply or generation, we're looking at all aspects, right? So some of it is generally the items that are in the generation queue today. So in the SPP generation queue, almost all of those are renewable in nature. That would be battery storage, wind, solar projects. And so to meet the needs from a resource adequacy perspective, it almost will certainly be the front side of that project will almost certainly be renewable in nature. And so we'll have to add renewable generation to meet that initial needs, that first 100, 200, 300 megawatts of additional load, because that's what's in the queue ready to be built. Thermal generation takes a much longer time frame to get built. Regulations and different things that are out there. We would likely be looking at 2030, 2031 type timeframes before, even if we started in 2025 down that process of building thermal generation, we're looking at 5 to 6 years before that could be operational. And so that might work for the back half of some of these projects and those type of things, but it won't work for the front half of some of those projects. So again, we're looking at what that blend continues to be. And so one of the things I generally preach is we have a really good story today. Essentially 50% of our retail sales are coming from green sources today. And that's this year and last year both. So we've been at that number for the last 2 years. It's really, really good, right? But again, we're concerned about all sorts of things. We're concerned about reliability. We're concerned about cost. We're concerned about all of those things. Again, delivery into the system, right? So again, these renewables are outside of our system. Therefore, we need to import that in from central Kansas, southern Kansas, western Kansas, all of those things. And the transmission system, again, one of the things that we're seeing internally and across the country is new transmission assets have to get built because we have so much renewable generation that's come online as we've closed thermal units over the past decade. That's just the nature of the beast. It's not a good problem or a bad problem. That's just where we were. But it adds to the reliability of the system by adding that transmission, by having those other resource types. And so we went down the road of being a very diverse fuel mix type of generating units. And so we're going to continue to look at those things and make sure that we're covering all the bases of all of those things. And so that's one more aspect that we look at and makes it even more challenging, but absolutely going to look at all the different potential generator options. So
I understand yourself. We know where it has for renewable roughly
So-
currently.
for 23 and 24, 50% of our retail sales came from green source, our own green sources. This does not count any market energy, even though we know market energy is roughly 40%. These are all from our own resources. So 50% of our retail sales came from our own green energy sources. Yeah.
Aren't we the high point in renewable among other industry? And I mean, what you said, 40% is Kansas,
So the state of Kansas,
40%.
of total generation, 40% of the state of Kansas came from wind. So that's just wind in general. It doesn't incorporate solar. Granted, there's not a ton of solar out there today. It's almost all wind in the state of Kansas today. Some of that will change going forward. But yeah, that's where the state of Kansas sits on a generation basis. Do we have I think we're higher than most. I think we were active earlier than most were. We do see that shift across the country in terms of more and more renewables are in play. But again, over the last decade, lots and lots of thermal resources have closed. And so therefore, we're starting to see more impacts to the system from a reliability standpoint than we did a decade ago. And some of that, again, is need new build out of new transmission, plus the changes in the nature of the generation mix, right? So we've gone away from more fuel on the ground type of resources to more resources that are coming either out of a pipe or are renewable in nature. And so both of those things create challenges, and we're really seeing those challenges in the winter season much more than the summer season, even though SPP and ourselves, we're summer peaking organizations, so our load is highest in the summer, but we're having the challenges in the winter because again, we all use natural gas for heating and those type of things. So that challenge is really built in the winter season today. And so that's where some of these challenges come when you're only developing gas units and then you have only renewable to back that up. So it's an interesting supply issue. But again, that's why one of the things we do believe, Nearman being a coal unit is still a really valuable resource that has fuel on the ground value that we know exactly the cost of that fuel every time we put it on the ground. And it's there to burn, whether it's freezing out or whether it's burning out. So those are values of having fuel on the ground that natural gas just doesn't have, right? It has to come from a pipe. So when wellheads are frozen, distribution's constrained, all of those things become challenges with the natural gas side. And then natural gas sets the market, generally speaking. And so therefore, when natural gas prices go up, the commodity itself, the market goes up as well. And so your margins shrink when it gets tougher conditions, right? Where I'll say coal expands when tougher conditions exist. So we generally do better with our coal units when prices are constrained on the natural gas side and those type of things. So it's a benefit to have this robust variance in our fuel mix. Next slide. Darren, do you want to speak to some of this? Sure. Oh.
Darren McNew, Executive Director of Electric Operations. Thank you. So talk a little bit about the infrastructure requirements specifically. I mean, guys kind of got ahead of the presentation a little bit. So this will make my job pretty easy. But as you already talked about, speed to market is one of the important things to these customers. So it's all about when they can get power and how soon we can get the infrastructure to them. So BPU is actually in a very good place in terms of, supply chain, as Jeremy already mentioned. When you start buying substation transformers and breakers, this equipment is 2, 3, 4 years out, which is really fast for most of these customers who want to build. So some of them have their own equipment they're bringing, like Project Linda. But from our standpoint, we actually have 2 substation transformers that would be available to serve, the first phase of one of these projects. Typically, these projects, we didn't really discuss it, but like the 600 megawatts of Wolf, they talk about bringing things on in 100 megawatt increments with, maybe 18 to 24 months in between those. So that's kind of how they step their project in piece by piece. So anyway, we have 2 transformers available today. One is a system spare unit that we can allocate to this project and obviously replace. And then the other transformer is a unit that is in service, but it's not loaded. It's kind of set up for some future load growth and expansion. So we could actually do some reconfiguration, with our system and relocate that transformer to one of these projects. And really the impact, to the system or any customer liability would be minimal. So we have that advantage having those 2 transformers, as well as some breakers. Some of our substations are designed for future expansion, additions of transmission lines or other transformers in the future. So again, we can take those breakers and relocate them to the project and replace them at a later date, with no impact. And those are things that, you know, many of these projects have been very interested in, is the fact that we have these transformers that we can bring, this equipment we can bring, and really, you know, I guess expedite the project schedule beyond if we're holding the transformer today, and we're looking at 4 years of lead time just to get that. So in a very good position from that standpoint with the infrastructure we need to build today. The other thing we talk about is, as Andrew mentioned, the overall transmission system and the BPU system. So, you know, we have our network of our substations and our transmission lines here within Wyandotte County. And really, there are 5 major transmission lines that tie us to the outside power grid. And, you know, as we kind of already discussed, you know, all of our power that we serve to provide to our customers is either generated internally at Nearman and our other generating assets, or we bring it in through these 5 major lines, you know, from our, you know, other renewable assets or purchase power agreements. It's all imported on those 5 lines. So what we look at, which again, we do every day already, is we have a dedicated planning engineer that performs system studies on our transmission system. And how is it performing? How can we improve it? And that's looking at not just, you know, day to day, but also what are these contingency scenarios? What if we have, you know, one of these lines or a different line out of service? What if we lose a substation? How does that impact our ability to serve load? And, you know, how can we improve that? So those are things we look at, all these scenarios all the time, every year, constantly updating that, constantly looking at it. And so one of the things we've done talking to these customers is had him run these studies, you know, modeling some of these large loads to say, how does that affect our system? You know, what are the weak points? What would we maybe have to do to be able to serve this load? As we sit today, it's another place when I think a very good place compared to a lot of utilities. You know, the first 100 megawatt block, and again, that's how I looked at it, because that's the typical model, is these projects coming on in 100 megawatt increments. So for that initial 100 megawatts, we could serve that additional load with no other system upgrades required. Obviously, the on-site substation still required, but there are no other system improvements anywhere else in our system that would need to be made. And in fact, you know, based on our studies, we can actually accommodate up to 300 megawatts of new load, which is a significant portion of, you know, of one of those projects, or all of one of those projects, with relatively minor upgrades. You know, there is some capital investment required. Alluded to, and we'll talk a bit more on the next slide. There is some investment, but again, you're talking relatively minor in the grand scheme of our system, and you know, capital there. So again, looking out at those steps, the first, you know, increment moving from the 100, where again, there is no upgrades required, up to say 200 megawatts load. We need to add some large capacitor banks to our substation. And really, those are primarily there for voltage support, making sure our system voltage is adequate. You know, even at peak load in those contingency situations I was talking about, where we may service, you know, for an outage or even just for maintenance, and what does our system look like? So again, really just capacitor banks, and we move up from 100 megawatts to 200 megawatts, even 300 megawatts, which are relatively minor capital investment projects, you know, serve a load of this size. And again, these are preliminary, you know, depending on which one of these projects were to move forward, exactly how that looks, some of the, you know, details may change. But overall, again, we're really looking at our system and those 5 lines that we import most of our power on, and those are really the limiting factor where whichever project goes, wherever it may be. So some of the details change, but overall, this is kind of how our system looks. Now, moving from 300 megawatts to 400 megawatts, you know, that is really where the capital investment increases quite a bit. We can look at things like new internal transmission lines to reinforce our system, and potentially a new tie line to the outside world. Again, another line that we could import power on, and make sure we maintain our system reliability, even in those contingency situations, unforeseen circumstances that we have. Moving beyond that level up to 500 megawatts or more, you know, that's when we talked about Another tie line, and really at that point, looking at probably a higher voltage, 345. Our highest transmission voltage today is 161 kV. We'd likely have to look at the 345. A whole review process there. So we would look at other options and but initially that's what we're likely looking at there. So
The attendance at these APP conferences help us to appreciate the the connection that we have, the privilege of being a part of, because that really helps us to be informed and stay informed about what's happening around the country. So that's really good.
yeah, absolutely. And so that's, we're looking not only at our system, but our surrounding system and how they affect each other. And again, that's something we do today, all the time, as part of our ongoing processes, just reliability and compliance obligations. So and I think that is pretty much it for me, and I turn it back to Haley.
So as you may remember from the IRP is some of the pieces with SPP, the requirements are changing. And so really beginning in 2026, I'll say from a resource adequacy side or a generator capability side, the rules are all changing starting next year. And so obviously you could say a great time to add a whole bunch of load and then make generators worth less. So it's an interesting timing for all of that stuff. But really, again, beginning in 2026, we move from our 15% reserve margin requirement today and go back 3 years, we were sitting at 12%, right? So we went from 12% to 15%. And then starting next year, we're moving to 16% in the summertime. Again, relatively small move, but we're moving from 15% in the winter to 36% in the winter. And again, it's some of the same reasons that I mentioned earlier is there's constraints on the pipeline. There's more and more issues in the winter season, even though the load isn't the same as it is in the summer. There's more contingency issues in the wintertime because it's harder to move gas, it's harder to get gas, those type of things. And so SPP and the stakeholders have moved that requirement up in the winter. And so now we're looking at a 36% reserve in the winter season. And so all that means is the same thing that we showed during the IRP process, is that additional generating resources are required, whether you're adding load or not adding load. And then we're at a point where, again, what we do is we try to layer resources so that resources don't all come due at the exact same time, right? So in 2027, we do have a wind asset that will be rolling off our books. And therefore that'll come off. And then later than that, other resources will come off at different intervals. And so we always know that additional generation is going to be required in some capacity. And again, different resources have different capabilities based off of SPP's requirements, right? So they utilize the effective load carrying capability for renewables. That is a method that they utilize to try to value those renewable assets. And that's batteries, that's wind, that's solar. Those type of assets are carried through that model. Thermal units are carried through a different model, and effectively, the thermal units is based on reliability metrics and those type of things. And so they both will be receiving haircuts going forward in terms of less accreditation than they received in 2025. But again, those changes are different by resource and by individual unit itself. And so we report our reporting to GADS, or reliability metrics, through GADS, which is a government reporting agency. And that tells SPP and the government effectively how reliable your units are in particular, and those types of resources are during different events. And so we do report that today, and so that's something we'll continue to do. But again, one note is we are changing and going to require more generating assets tomorrow than we did today. So that's an important method to look at. So this chart here, and I want, this page will need some explanation because it's somewhat tricky just by nature. And I just want to make sure that everybody has a handle on what this is really saying. And so, as I mentioned earlier, 2025, we expect our peak load to be about 185 megawatts. That's based on all of our current customers, any expectations for changes within our load community today, but about 485 megawatts. We believe we have about, well, we know we have about 620 megawatts of accredited capacity for 2025. And so, assuming that our load doesn't change moving into 2026, we would expect our reserve margin to be at 17%. So therefore, as I mentioned before, we need to be at 16%. So we're right on the cusp of the minimum that we can carry going into 2026. Again, you don't always want to be really long, but that is a really tight margin. And so any additional load that comes that we may not have expected, those type of things coming into 2026 may impact that. But again, we're right on the threshold of where we want to be moving into 2026. And again, I should have prefaced this. I am talking about the summer season. So the summer season in 2026 is the more important season for us because we have to carry additional accredited capacity in the summer because, again, our peak summer is roughly 500, our peak winter is roughly 400. And so therefore, even if I have 36% on top of that 400, it comes to a lesser number than 500 times the 16%. And so therefore, we still have a little bit of room there on the summer side. As we add data center load and their load is flat across all seasons, it brings up the entire ship. Now winter becomes, we have to carry more capacity for the winter season because the entire season gets lifted across all the year. So it'll change as we add some of these large loads that are really efficient loads. So that'll change. But one thing I did want to point out in 2027, again, assuming our load doesn't change, we will see our reserve margin move to 30%. Again, some of that is, we knew as we were going through the IRP process, we looked at paper capacity to fill some of that shortfall in those early years. But one of the things that we've seen change over the last, I'll say, 6 months is that the cost of paper capacity has continued to ratchet up at a really quick pace. And so the paper capacity that I see on the market today is $10 a kW a month. We ended up purchasing a longer term contract, PPA contract with a solar facility in central Kansas. And our capacity portion of that will be well less than the paper capacity margin. And then we'll get an energy hedge on top of that with the energy side. Again, the energy side is on peak, right, during the summer periods. So it'll be a really good resource for us, and it'll also diversify our fuel mix even greater. So it'll be a good solution to fulfill that paper capacity need that we thought we'd fulfill for paper reasons, but this will serve both of those purposes a little bit.
I'm sorry, Andrew. I'm clueless to talk about paper capacity.
My apologies, and I need it. Paper capacity is the ability to count accredited capacity on your books that may sit anywhere within FPP service territory but I get no energy resources off of those. So I could point to a machine that sits in South Dakota and say, that is my resource, and I will do a transaction with that utility up in South Dakota. I will pay him some money and I will count that accredited capacity and he will lose that accredited capacity, right? So effectively, that's one of the benefits of being in an RTO, right? Is the RTO looks at the entire grid from the Dakotas all the way down to Texas, where if it was just us, we would have to look at our own bubble, right? So this expands our ability and SPP's ability to count that. So just like today in 2025 and 2024, we've sold paper capacity the last few years. So we've been a little bit long and actually have turned some money into that value. And we've sold those to resource, or I'll say utilities, out of state, all these other things, but it's been a value to us. And so now again, that's what paper capacity is. It essentially means there is no material energy that goes along with that generator. And so we could buy that generator from any asset, right? It could be a wind asset, a solar asset, a thermal asset, but there's no wind accredited with that. So we call it paper. So it's really a financial transaction, not a material transaction.
Thank you.
So along that line, KPU comprises what? Like just 1.5% of the whole SPP?
Right at 1%.
1% of the whole. Is everyone else, is the other 99%, are they all looking at, a commensurate, increase on what their reserves should be as well? I mean, it's industry wide.
This is industry wide. So yes, we actually are going into this kind of as Darren said, we are in a slightly advantageous position compared to the majority of utilities moving to this 2026 year. So we've taken some positions previously that have set this up actually pretty well for us. Obviously, the data center changes the entire paradigm of all of that. But the reason that I should say that we've skyrocketed in paper capacity pricing is because now everybody is in the market to try to buy capacity, any way, shape, form that they can get. And as I mentioned before, is you can't build a new thermal unit until 2030, 2031. So you can't just plop something in the ground and call it good. There is a lot that goes into this, but we don't have a capacity market in SPP, whereas MISO has a capacity market. But it's moved effectively from $3 to north of $8 in a period of about a year. So you can see how far that movement is, and FPP is in the same boat. All the RTOs have taken a step back and said, our function is reliability. And so therefore, we're going to focus on reliability. That's the RTO's function, right? Reliability, organization, that's what it is. And so they push that back to us utilities to say, we need this amount of accreditation to serve our customers reliably. Well, now the money, the cost comes back to us load serving entities, right? So we have to go get generating assets that cost money. And therefore we're at the face of that. And so they're trying to serve their purposes, which is reliability. And they're saying we're not reliable enough because we're hitting contingencies much more frequently than we ever did before. And again, that's because of a change in fuel mix. It's a change in resource type. And again, all of us load serving entities that used to serve our own bubbles have retired generation over the last 5 to 10 years because it's expensive. And therefore we want to just be right at the cusp of what that reserve requirement is. And now we've added wind and solar and these different aspects to it. And now that SPP says, I have 30,000 plus megawatts of wind, that is really hard for me to balance and hit. Again, we're really talking about the 3% of hours that actually matter, right? So we can serve reliably a whole bunch of the year, but those 3% of the hours are the real challenging hours, whether those be really cold hours or really hot hours. And so those are the hours that the RTOs focus on in terms of the reliability side for our thermal units. And then how they effectively value the renewable assets and how they perform during those hours. And so it's a challenge for the RTO. It's a challenge for us. So From a generation mix perspective, as I mentioned before, we have a really diverse mix. We have coal, gas, fuel oil, wind, solar, hydro, landfill gas. We have about every type that you can get. We do not have battery storage up here today. It is a brand new technology, really brand new. I think I'm going to say this, but I think there's only 2 to 10 megawatts of battery storage in all of SPP operating as of the start of this year. And you're talking about a 50,000 megawatt RTO. So there's very, very little battery storage in the system today. But as we roll into 2025, there are projects of 100 and 200 megawatts coming on this year. And so we will start seeing how those projects perform, how those function, what kind of value they receive, those type of things. And so we're studying those closely to see what those projects look like and how they perform. So again, our largest single resource we have in our system is our Nearman 1 coal plant. So that's that. Our most flexible resource is really our Dogwood facility. It's a flexible from a heat rate perspective, from a fuel source, and it really balances our resource mix pretty well. We actually have pretty limited gas generating units today outside of that unit. And then we have a dual fuel unit as well at the Nearman Station site. Again, I pointed this out earlier. I want to continue people to hear this is 50% of our retail sales come from green energy sources today. So those are wind, solar, hydro, landfill gas. They're really important things. I'll look at the pie chart over there to the left. This is accredited capacity. So we talk about energy, we talk about nameplate, we talk about all of those things. This is what we believe the accredited capacity of the different types of resources are going to be moving into 2026 and beyond. So this is the effective load carrying capability, as well as the forced outage rate on the thermal side. So one of the things that coal stands out because it's a standalone unit in terms of we only have one coal unit. So that's obviously Nearman 1. And so we anticipate the accredited capacity off of Nearman 1 to be 222 megawatts. Today, I actually get a credit in 2025, 244 megawatts. I generally consider the unit about a 235 megawatt unit. So we expect haircuts across our thermal fleet to be about 8%. That's the haircut that we're expecting on our thermal fleet. So that's from 2025 to 2026 and beyond. We're thinking it'll be somewhere between 8% and 10%, but moving initially into about an 8% range. When we look at the green units, which are our renewable units, those are, again, going off the effective load carrying capability. So if I look at my wind assets in particular, because we have 250 megawatts of wind assets today in our fleet, we're expecting the wind assets to have effective load carrying capability of about 14%. So not in 2025, but in 2024, I got 60% accreditation off my wind. Next year, I get 14.
So
Wow, that's a big difference.
It's a big difference, and all that has to be made up, right? So my cost doesn't go down. I don't get to change any of my cost paradigm, but that has to be made up. I have to make up that much different in another resource type, right?
that's what I was gonna tell you. So in those terms, if you need 100 megawatts, you'd have to buy
Yes, so.
86.
You have to buy a lot, right? So 5 times that amount, 6 times that amount is what you have to buy on a wind asset. Again, everything has different value paradigms, right? From the different perspective of how they operate. So I don't want to say one is good and one is bad. They all have different perspectives in terms of the way they operate. And that's why I believe that a diverse fuel mix actually adds value versus takes away value. And so a lot of utilities have went really heavy gas and are 90+% natural gas. But again, you look at the Uri events, all of those utilities got hit really, really hard because either you didn't have enough credit to buy natural gas, or you were scared to death if it tripped offline that you weren't going to receive any of those funds back because you were paying, 47 times what you traditionally pay for your per decatherm of gas. And so those are things about having a balanced portfolio that allows those different things to take place. Again,
Market is the market.
the market is, it is, and it's only getting more challenging, I would argue, going forward than it has been in the past. So, one note I will point out on the green side, which is fascinating a little bit to me, I guess, is that the hydro side is really not changing, moving to the effective load carrying capability. So our government hydro is staying 100% accredited at the nameplate value that we get to take today. So that's an interesting resource. Again, it has a lot of different nuances to it in terms of they buy power to serve anything that they can't deliver and those type of things. And so again, it's an interesting thing, but that hydro facility is staying at 100% of accredited value, at least for the government hydro piece. Run of River doesn't accredit very well because it is running the river, and therefore it's all based on water flows and snow melt and that type of thing. So anyway, again, we're just talking on this slide, it's accredited capacity, which is different than nameplate or output or any of those type of. So anyway.
Does Dogwood have any additional shares available?
So they do not. They sold their last share here this past year. So Evergy bought the last piece. We are going through some discussions with Dogwood and the entire Dogwood team, so all the owners, to explore what other possibilities may exist at that site. And so we're going to explore what that might look like and if it makes sense. So we're just going down that process today to explore those things, because again, like us, all the other owners have needs as well. And they're trying to figure out if there can be some synergies by putting additional generation at that site. So we're having those discussions like we are internally to our system. But again, we're trying to explore every avenue with every facet. And don't get me wrong, so with everybody else. But it is an important time that we're all trying to figure out the best means of going forward, what that looks like. I've kind of hit on this point already, but we're really exploring multiple generation paths, and it will likely be a multi-pronged approach to serve any of these data center needs, because as they come, we will absolutely need additional generation. And then therefore, what will that generation be? And I kind of mentioned it previously. Likely the first few hundred megawatts of data center load that comes online will likely be served through renewable generation services. And so that could be, wind, solar, battery. And then as we look beyond that, we'll continue to explore whether renewables are the best process for that on all the resources, whether it be, battery location specific, whether thermal has a place in all of that. So we're exploring every avenue. We're turning over every stone to make sure that we can find those best solutions. Again, we are considering paper capacity as well to layer in some of that capacity depending on the timing of different projects that may come online. And so we are looking at paper capacity, but the market for paper capacity has gotten really constricted and limited because all of us are looking for capacity in any means we can. And so it's really gotten tight. And most of us that have some room aren't willing to sell until we get to a point down the road where we feel really comfortable that we're long. And so anybody that is long probably won't sell until the end of that road, because they don't want to put themselves in a position where they have to go turn around and buy additional capacity to make up whatever they sold. So most utilities are conservative or risk averse nature, and therefore they're going to hold on to that capacity.
So when is that wind contract up?
So the
Earlier.
Smoky Hills wind contract is up at the end of 2027. That's a 25 megawatt wind project. It is up at the end of 2027.
Okay.
So we most likely won't renew that contract with that specific resource. We haven't had any dialogue associated with that. But again, as we talked about a little bit, is we are only talking about, 3 to 4 megawatts of accredited capacity. So it feels like, oh, it's nothing. Well, it's all something. And so therefore, what do we do with that? And whether we roll that into another wind project or a solar project, battery, something else. So All of those things are up, but that's the next resource that will be falling off the books in the near term, so.
So let me ask, and this may be a little off kilter. If we reach capacity and we were within the centers, both centers were here, is there ever the prospect of them purchasing from somewhere else, power from somewhere else? Because it's beyond our capacity to do that without substantial. So let's say if they were to purchase from one of the IOUs or function with Evergy. Wouldn't we still be able to, I don't know what benefit would be conferred to the BPU, but we wouldn't have to do the build out. And I'm just thinking, wouldn't we'd still get the fee too? We'd still be able to charge even if they bought it from somewhere else, wouldn't we?
Yeah, so effectively,
I know that's a little not what we really,
No.
we'd rather.
it's a great question. And so there are regulated markets and there are deregulated markets. And so deregulated markets work in a different way in terms of there's a utility that runs the wires. And then you can purchase your generation or energy from any provider that serves that area. And so you could buy that generation from wherever you wanted to. Here in Kansas, you only can buy from the providers that you are in their service territory. And so they cannot subscribe with Evergy or any other utility to serve that load. And so we're responsible for the capacity, we're responsible for the energy. So one, we don't get to shirk that duty either, right? We don't get to say, hey, Evergy, can you do something here? But it is our required duties, and then it's their requirement to be served by us. And so we can put, I should say, developers can put projects in your service territory. So we have wind projects that obviously don't sit in our service territory, but those aren't load serving customers, right? So they're served differently because again, they're renewable or batteries or what have you. So they're not part of the load itself. So they're a little bit different on the generation side, but as a load customer, you can only be served by the utility that is in that region. So,
Okay, thanks.
Lee, did you want to speak to environmental?
I'm here for the community about the environmental areas, the data center. So, I mean, there is no question, I guess the data centers use a lot of energy and they use a lot of water. And just in doing some, can you hear me okay? Just in doing some research on this, it really is related to their, I think, the cooling.
Please ID yourself.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I'm Lee Mulholland. I'm the compliance officer for the company. So we have a few slides here. And doing some research, it appears that a lot of the energy is used to cool the equipment. So the IT equipment, the servers, and they run, the servers and all the IT equipment, they run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So they do use quite a bit of electricity to do that. And then they also need to use quite a bit of water to cool the systems and to keep the systems cool. And that also allows for the components that they use they don't have to recycle that as much. So there have been some questions in the community about water scarcity. There have also been some questions about, using more electricity in the community and the GHG emissions that result from that. So first of all, we have plenty of water, in the community that we can service the customers. But just in doing some research and two of the things that I think are the most important things to keep into consideration is, first of all, we don't know the design, of some of the systems. We are probably, I would say, far along, Andrew, to agree with the power transitions team and understanding the capacity that they would like to put on site, but we don't know the engineering design of that system just yet. But the engineering systems have been improving over time. So we would hope to be able to be brought into, or at least informed about some of the technologies that they plan to use, and in particular on the cooling efficiency side. So the cooling method that these units use, or that these buildings, these systems use, is very important to understand, because the more efficient it is, the less electricity, it needs to use, and the less water, that the systems need to use. I also think it's very important for us to understand any kind of sustainability initiatives or sustainability goals that these companies may put into place. So we've got some environmental kind of areas. You see power usage effectiveness here, the cooling system, and the different kinds of cooling systems and the new technologies on that. Power usage effectiveness is probably something that we would want to understand in terms of the individual data centers and how they calculate that. That's the amount of electricity used that actually goes to the IT equipment. So if you have a 1-for-1, then that shows that it's much more efficient than something that's much higher than that. And so I think the next steps is for us to sort of understand, when we have a data center that actually we enter into an agreement, is to understand the design of those units and how much water they anticipate using, on an annual basis. What kind of a technology that they plan to use on their cooling systems. And then also it will be important for us to understand some of the sustainability initiatives that the companies are using. So the sustainability initiatives, all the big hyperscalers, if you go on their websites, so Facebook or Meta, Google, and then Amazon, they all have sustainability initiatives. How are they really implementing and using and reporting out on that will be important to understand. And so I think we're learning, but I think as long as you can kind of build some relationships, and we've got really solid relationships, I think with power transitions, understanding the design of the systems is going to be important. I also think that we may be seeing some reliability standards coming down in the future on these systems. NERC has done this study on the loss of large loads and how that might impact the system. And so there could be very well some reliability, areas that they expand on as more of these systems come online in new markets too. So I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has. That's it. Is this?
Oh,
yeah,
Megan.
sold?
Do you mean reliability?
Well, when large loads go offline, you can have a shock to the system. So understanding kind of some of the reliability, like we have reliability standards to make sure that our power is staying, is flowing properly, at all hours of the day. And so we've got units in place to make sure that happens, that there's not any on these types of loads.
So kind of as you think through like Darren's aspects, right, is you have to keep this voltage support at a level that is consistent so that your lights aren't blinking on and off all the time and these type of things, right? So as something changes on the system, how does that impact everybody else? And so those are the things that you're making, that again, we do studies on and make sure that we're doing studies on, is how do these various changes impact, the grid as a whole, in terms of, if I pull that off, how does that impact everybody else? If I put that on, how does that impact everybody else? These types of things to make sure that it doesn't negatively impact, the grid as a whole, because again, when you have this much load at one place, how does that impact everything else when you pull it out of the mix and so forth? So
There's think of it in terms of pressure, right? You want the pressure on the system to be consistent. You don't want to add something in here and have a bubble pop up here, or remove something here and the opposite effect happens. So there's a number of technical and electrical, not just theories, but laws and things that happen, but maintaining the regulated pressure, the proper voltage, the proper VAR flows, there's a number of things that adding or removing loads can affect how all of that operates with each other.
Would that include, I don't know, adding a new plant down in Fairfax for GM? I mean, that's something they're looking at right now, right? And I mean, it could be any heavy use customer, right? That just doesn't keep everything right here,
That's correct. It
right?
could be any heavy use, but also where in the system that they decide to go. That probably has a bigger effect than the type of asset that's coming on is geographically where it lands. And now what does that do to the rest of the pressure around the system? Absolutely correct.
So data centers are notorious for being basically one unit, right? So they tend to be either completely on or completely off. Most manufacturing plants have lines of manufacturing and then they have their base building usage and everything else. So they usually won't link the entire plant up with the data center that's much more.
But yeah, every customer in the system, is part of that equation, right? All of us have that piece of the equation. So, we think through that on EVs or heat pumps or all of these things that as we may change our residential units in terms of how we operate, how does that impact, the distribution network and different things like that. So those are things that I'll say the engineers out there have to think about all the time. And so better them than I, but, so getting to our rates a little bit, I know we spoke about this just a little bit, but the whole goal of this discussion with these data centers is really risk mitigation, making sure that we're protecting our current customer groups and our current customers that are here. So really making sure that we've already built tailored rate classes today. We have a high load factor rate class that we built several years back. We have, I'll say, commercial and industrial classes, residential classes. All of these are intended to make sure that those classes are paying for the services that they're actually using on a class level, right? So the difference is with these size of scale that we're talking about, it's one thing to be a high load factor customer, right? If you're a 4 megawatt crypto data center, you're 4 megawatts. I don't have to go build a whole bunch of things to serve that load, but you're still pulling in 80-90% load factors. Great. But these are different and the same in terms of if these guys leave, all those assets that we built are still there and we all have to pay for those assets. And that's the thing that we got to make sure that we're protecting against is building assets that no longer have an entity to help offset those costs. And so we're building as we work through this process, and we're still working through this process. This is a work in progress for sure. But we are looking at how rates are impacted, what mechanisms we have to put in place to provide security and assurance in the short term and in the long term to make sure that none of us are left holding the bag per se in terms of these additional assets we either build on the transmission side or generating assets. And so those are things that we're working through with these developers, but also working through with third-party engineering firms and those type of things to make sure that we've built some tools and mechanisms around protecting us today that are on the system today. And so one of the things that, is pointed out a little bit is in this tailored rate classes, each customer pays based on the type of usage that they have. And so really, when you talk about the more efficient the customer is, so essentially the more energy it uses per level of demand. So right, if I'm a 20 megawatt customer and I use 20 megawatts every hour of the year, I'm a super efficient customer, really efficient because I use everything I need. So you only need to build 20 megawatts of capacity to meet my 20 megawatts and I use that all year. Me and you as residential customers, we use a ton at 5 p.m. on a Thursday when it's hot as heck out. But overnight, I shut everything down and I go to bed and I don't leave my lights on. So we're not great customers as a general rule, just as a class. That's how we are because most of our load comes from heating and cooling load, which is not the most efficient load to serve. But that's what we do. And that's why our rates are built for us. And so again, data centers have really high usage levels, usually between 80 and 95%. And so they're really efficient users of that. So on a per kWh basis, an actual consumption basis, their number would be lower likely than our number would be because on a kWh basis. The same within the residential class. If Mary left her lights on all night, all the time, she'd pay less per kWh. Her bill would be higher because obviously she's consuming more power. But on a kWh basis, she'd be paying less. She doesn't want to pay more for the sake of leaving your lights on overnight. So therefore we all shut them off, right? So we care about what our total bill is. We don't care about our per kWh necessary. So those are things that these customers are really efficient and will likely pay a lower per kWh, but a higher bill overall than every other customer we have in the footprint. So really the goal is to be cost reflective pricing. So large users contribute more total revenue based on their usage. And this helps offset the system costs that all of us incur. And so this will help keep residential rates, small commercial rates lower by having a larger customer eat up more of those fixed costs and variable costs, honestly, across the spectrum. And really the goal of all of this, I say it over and over again, is risk mitigation. It's really shielding all of us that have built the system to date, right? Some of us have been in the system 10 years, some of us have been in the system 50 years, but we've all been building this system over time. And so it's really shielding that customer base from the additional assets that have to get built because of this customer, right? So that is the goal of all of this. This is not about growth. This is not about that. It's about shielding protection and then providing some, I'll say, reprieve on rates and costs that are coming our way. One way or the other, they're coming our way. And this customer will help alleviate, or these types of customers could help alleviate some of those costs. So again, this is really reiterating a lot of the stuff we've said, but I want to make sure that we put it in front of you is new large users must carry their financial weight so costs aren't passed to existing ratepayers. I want to keep saying that because I know it's a question that you guys probably hear, and we're only as knowledgeable as the stuff that we hear, right? And so we need to keep sharing this information. As Jeremy has alluded to, we are absolutely not offering any subsidies of any kind to any of these customers. We have had conversations with every single one of the customers we spoke of today, and we have not offered any incentives. Traditionally, when customers either increase their load here in our service territory or came to our service territory, we have offered incentive economic riders to those customers to encourage them to come and use more consumption, right? We are not talking about those same things with these users. It'll be really interesting to see as we go forward, as we add these users, as all those economic development incentives from our vantage point change because we are no longer chasing additional load, right? From 2000 to 2020, effectively no load was added to the system collectively, right? So we've seen new load come and go, but effectively we've been flat as a system, and therefore all of us utilities have had to incentivize new load to come to our service territory. If we acquire one of these data centers or multiple data centers, will we need to go out and recruit new load, or will we no longer require those things? Which is a good problem to have. Is you're welcome to come, we'd love to have you, but here's our rates and thank you for coming, right? Those will be new conversations that we haven't typically had over the last 20 years. From a planning perspective, so we have local commitments and customers commit to, so the whole goal is we will have a timeline on expectations of about when the load will be added and what is the timeline of meeting that load, right? So Darren has work to do on his side from the transmission and distribution assets. I have work on my side to create, resource adequacy generation along with Jaren and Dawn. And so we're talking through all of those things to make sure that we can meet the timelines that they're requesting. And two, that what they're requesting and we go meet, that they have some skin in the game that says, if you did not fulfill your obligation, I have a financial means to hold you accountable. And so we are going through that process. And that's really part of that risk protection and letters of credit. So we've gone down the road of putting some financial guarantees in place, and all of these customers to date have reviewed that agreement, so they understand what it says, what it means to them and those type of things. And so it's really intended, like anything else. The same thing we talk about the substation side is, hey, if you're paying for this asset, then I'm not at risk of having a liability, right? So if you want to bring your own gen, I will absolutely consider what that looks like. How does that impact what we do here today? But if you leave, I now no longer have a requirement to pay for that generation, right? They pay for that generation. So we're talking through those things with the various parties to make sure that we can all come to an agreement that works for all of us. And it's really, again, about security and protection and risk averse. So it's a really interesting process, but the whole thing is about risk mitigation and making sure that we protect the customers that we have in the system today.
And I imagine that you're looking at some of the other examples for other states. And when some of the areas already, you looked at those that have run into the same.
That's our biggest educator, is taking a look at the losses, taking a look at the communities that have lost and figuring out what was the pitfall, how do we avoid it? We were talking earlier to one of the commissioners, and it's kind of like the first plasma TV came out and you went out and bought it and it was $4,500 for a 32-inch TV. 2 years later, you could get that thing for $800. We want to be the $800 people, not the $4,500 people, right? So unfortunately for those communities, they've lost and there's a real burden for their folks. Fortunately for us, we've been behind the curve a little bit, and so we're able to learn from those things that have happened.
It is absolutely the best learning tool
Yeah.
there is. And so the nice thing is we have seen data centers, around the country. So we get to see different rates, different PUCs at different states in terms of what they're doing. Evergy across the street, they have data centers over there. What are they proposing going forward? All of those things are great learning tools. And so we are absolutely studying all of those approaches to make sure that we're using best-in-class processes and purposes to make sure that, again, we hold ourselves harmless from a customer-based standpoint, right? So that is the best mechanism to learn versus trying to just think your way through it, is see your way through based on other users' commitment. So I've had conversations with different utility leaders in terms of what they do today versus what they did 5 years ago and those type of things. And it's really helpful conversations to get an understanding of what's going on and what they like and dislike and think and those type of things. So one of the always fascinating things as we talk through these things is just the money side, right? We all are encouraged by data centers because we do see large ratepayers from the utility side. They pay high property taxes, those things from the unified government side. So we all believe that they can be good partners. It's just how do we do that? And so as we look at the forecasted revenue on a 100 megawatt basis, as Darren said, we generally look at it in 100 megawatt blocks. That's generally about one building in scale. And so one building is equal to about $57 million in annual revenue. To put that in perspective is one building can generate about as much revenue as half of the houses in all of Wyandotte County, Kansas. So that one building that you see sit there takes half of the houses in Kansas. It's an amazing number from a revenue standpoint. And then obviously you look at the scale that we were talking about, 600, 200, these types of things. So you can see how much revenue is generated with this. Some of that is variable revenue, right? So it has an offsetting cost associated with it, right? The ERC, these type of things, which are all cost basis. And then other things have fixed costs to them, right? So whether it be T&D assets that we incorporate into our rates in terms of fixed cost structures that we use to pay for existing structures plus upcoming structures, right? And then same on the generation side. So some of it's fixed, some of it's variable, but this is a whole bunch of revenue that we think could be utilized in a way to help the rest of us on ongoing expenses and rates going forward, so. So I did want to point out future debt and investment is as we go through these processes and as we're looking in our normal process of business, regardless of data center. So both sides of that is we look at debt instruments as a means to acquire additional assets, whether those be generating assets, whether those be transmission assets, those type of things. Again, water side takes from the, reserve fund in the state of Kansas, those type of things. So we look at all of those things. Debt is not a bad thing. I hate to view it negatively. I mean, some of us view it negatively, but it's really not a negative thing. It's really a method of making sure that you're allocating resources in a way that both utilizes a payment structure for those that utilize those assets, right? So if I put the whole burden and say I have to have enough cash today to buy a new generating asset for tomorrow, is everybody on the system today had to pay for that generating asset that's going to be out there for 50 years that I'm no longer going to utilize, right? So that is a mechanism to spread those costs out over 30 years so that therefore those users of those products receive the benefit and the cost of those projects, right? So that's why we do those major upgrades through generally debt financing mechanisms. So it's I don't want to say it's neither good nor bad, but it's one more tool in the chest that we utilize when we're looking at these big asset purchases, again, on the transmission side or on the generation side. We do those in both mechanisms. So it's important to understand that if you see, hey, debt is coming, oh my gosh, then they're not paying their share. That is not the case. We are actively having discussions internally about debt projects today for existing purposes and reasons. And so it's one of those things, one more tool in the chest that we want to make sure we explore all avenues and the best means of meeting our needs today, but also our needs tomorrow. So. And on that note, I will take any questions. Darren, Lee, Darren, Don, Darren, Steve, if you want some water, we didn't talk much water, but if you want.
This is a wealth of information and I'm just trying to assimilate a little bit of it at a time. How much do the decision makers at the very end understand and know about this whole process?
When you say, sorry, decision makers?
Eugene. I forgot.
So
Yeah.
Stevie, go ahead.
I don't have to. I thought I was.
So how much they understand, I don't know. We've answered every question they've given us. I'm sure they have, like you, probably many more. And if you hear different pieces of information, Angie's met with them with some of the things she knows, but we did meet with them 3-on-3 type meetings when we were going through the power transitions deal. And so we took that opportunity to explain them a lot of the data center centric information, but I'm sure there's still questions.
And I do want to point out that we are actively talking with David Johnston and his team on that side as well. So we are actively, I'll say, hand in hand, having these discussions in terms of projects and priorities and the different things, because these projects are so large that it impacts the utility directly. They can't go out and make an agreement that I can't fulfill. And I can't go make an agreement that they're not going to fulfill. And so we got to walk through this process together to make sure it works for all of us. Again, we got planning and zoning issues. We have other issues at different sites. And so therefore, we all need to make sure that we're on the same page, same understanding, and some of these things. So I'll say from that side, from the staff side, we are working through that. But from an elected official standpoint, there is always more work to be done. And again, as Jeremy said, we have had several conversations and we welcome more conversations.
And we get with Greg Kendall and, Chelsea and her team, that team that gets out and talks to a lot of people. So we have a monthly joint meeting with the BPU team, David and Chelsea's team, and Greg and his team. we're meeting once a month now as a three-part.
That makes me.
So that we're all answering questions. Darren's talking about best place in the system. Andrew's talking about financial assurance agreements. Greg's talking about who, where, maybe what, all the things that comes his way. So that's an active coordination that's happening that's been beneficial as well.
I have another question. I hope it's not silly, but the parallel where one part could be on the north side and one could be, so could one exist without the other?
It absolutely could. And then we asked, so that developer was in here last week, face to face. And I posed that very question is, what if one side of the road gets approved and the other side doesn't? He said, well, then we'll build that side of the road and we'll keep trying on the other.
Okay,
Because it's a multi-year build out, right? So they're going to be invested and working on that site for multiple years. And what their commitment was is that while we're doing that, I'm still going to try to get this side, but they could absolutely exist without the other one.
okay.
Yeah, I was just looking at slides from that we received when we went to the APPA, and much of what you presented today is right there. So, it's just really.
No, it is, and it's relative, right? I know Lee sent some slides over and there were a wealth of slides there. It is the talking point, I'll say, for me, and seems to be everywhere, every conversation. So the nice thing about being out there is we all get a lot of information coming our way. So it's good to see all that information. So I love seeing other people's presentation and so forth to make sure that we're thinking about the different things and the tools out there. So it's really valuable. So.
Where is currently one closest to us right now?
Right across the bridge.
Right across the bridge.
Right across?
Yeah, one near the airport.
Yeah.
Lenexa. I mean,
There is one in Lenexa?
There's several in our metropolitan area.
Yeah, and they vary in size, right? So there's smaller 20 megawatt projects, smaller, right? That's large, but 20 megawatt projects. And then there's a couple 100 megawatt projects as well. 600 would be the largest project in the local region if that project as itself comes to fruition. But all of these, there are multiple sites, I'll say in Evergy's territory that is still working through that process as well. So some of those are expanding, some of those are looking to come online. And so there's lots of projects that work, but 600 megawatts is one of the larger projects that you'll see. I mean, yes, if you look down in Mississippi and some of those southern states, there's a couple projects that are talking 1,000 megawatt plus type numbers. But for the most part, 600 is a very, very large project.
Is there even a 300 around?
I don't recall exactly. I think it's a 200 megawatt project today is the largest project locally. But I do think they have some expansion plans to move that higher. But I think it's 200 megawatts today.
So even half of Wolfwood.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one of the things that we're seeing as this process goes through, right? Is they're saying, hey, can I just scale this stuff way up instead of building, again, small 200 megawatt projects and start scaling up to 600 or 1,000 plus megawatt projects? Because they're like, hey, if I'm going to put this much stuff here, then I'm going to just put it all here. I'm going to try to own generation and all of that stuff at the same site and so forth. So there's a lot of changes, I'll say, but yeah, scale has gotten bigger for sure.
One of the other things we have developed along with this presentation, which, I want to thank Amber and her team for, cleaning up the information that we sent her and making it be a really good, I think, resource that we can give to other organizations, other interested groups, other elected bodies. But she's also taken a lot of our thoughts collectively and put them into this FAQ sheet. And I believe you have it in your packet. So these are good things that we can continue to share, things that you can take with you and have as talking points. And so I did want to make sure you understood that you had that as well.
Good, thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
Back to you, Mr. President.
But very interesting and very much appreciated. Thank you. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, team, for the insight on this timely project that is before us. It gives us quite a bit to mull over and to work. And I'm sure you will keep us posted as you work with the trilogy, the UG and Greg Kendall and everyone as things progress. But I'm grateful. I'm sure the board is as well. Anyone else have any comment?
I just have one more question. When, will there be any voting at the UG on any of this information? Soon?
So, you know, they're really distinct roles, right? The VP board sets the rates, and you've already done that for this. The Unified Government Commission has themselves two separate functions. One is land use in planning and zoning, and they sit as a quasi judicial board for that. So they do have some upcoming decisions to make on that for one of the projects. Then they also vote on any development agreements that the unified government would enter into, because those, you know, if the company wants some incentive, you know, theoretically, a company could come in and just get the land use going and run their business and wouldn't need the development agreement. But if they want any sort of incentive, they have to, that goes before the commission.
I think the short answer is on the 26th of June, there's a meeting where there'll be some votes.
Yeah, and that's the planning and zoning part.
Okay, planning and zoning on the 26th.
Yes.
What
there-
stage is the power transitions in right now?
So they're still in their due diligence phase. So they're actively working with Lee and her team, Don and his team on all of the studies and all the other information that they need to do and conduct their due diligence on the site. They've also engaged, I think, a little bit of Fairfax Drainage District and the Corps to make sure they're following all their restrictions and getting the information they need, but they're very much still in due diligence.
Were there some timeframes on that as things had to be done by?
So they have, their initial period time frame is a year. They had 12 months to collect and do all of their sampling, research, compliance. They could be done sooner in a year, or there's a second year that was approved in the option purchase agreement, in which the price escalates pretty drastically for you to keep that exclusivity. Because, you know, for obvious reasons, we want things to move along and happen, but they're still within the first year.
Okay.
Very good. Anything else for the good of the order? I want to thank you again for the presentation and how well vetted it helps us to become. Very appreciated, all of it. If that's it, I entertain us. Do we need a motion in the work session for adjournment?
All right, so move.
Second,
We do a roll call, we have a motion and a second for adjournment.
Roll call, Mulvaney Henry,
Aye.
Parker, Gonzalez,
aye.
Brenneman,
Aye.
Haley,
Aye.
Wakes.
All right.
That motion carries.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.